Bonjour mon petit croissant, Aaron here, back with another video. It is time. The potentially most overpowered character to ever be released into Genshin is here. But does the Hydro Archon, FURINA, live up to the hype? Let's find out. But before we hop right into the video, I just want to say that if you like my stuff, or if you found anything informative, why not take a bite out of yourself, my baked buttery pastry? Also note that there are characters and music sources in the description for y'all to peruse at your leisure, or in case you hear something you like. Also, I would like to announce that they pretty heavily buffed FURINA by about 15% while I was rendering this initial video, so I might say some stuff that might not be 100% accurate. I'm not going to edit all of these things out because the main points I make have not changed, and these minor details only make up maybe 3% or less of this video. It will also take me much more time to re-record a bunch of stuff and then shift everything around. It's rather annoying, so instead I'm just going to make sure that everything on screen is up to date. But with that out of the way, let's start off with the overview. FURINA is an HP scaling off-field Hydro DPS buffer with a massive need for a healer to be paired with her. While her normal and charge attacks don't do much as they scale off of her attack and deal physical damage, they are still relatively important to mention. This is also how she will activate her Numa or Uxia aligned damage, which can occur once per 6 seconds for each different alignment. What's most important about these attacks are their timings, as using 3 normal attacks will take about 1.5 seconds, while her 4th normal attack along with her charge attack will both take about 1 second to go off. While this may be all there is to note for timings, her charge attack has an extra component to it. When using her charge attack, she will switch between her Uxia and Numa aligned stance. This stance switch will change the effects of her elemental skill, it will change which source of damage will proc from her normal attacks, and it will change her appearance somewhat. Numa stance will have her skill heal allies, it will proc Numa aligned damage, and it will cause her to wear white clothes and grow out her hair. Uxia stance, however, will have her skill deal damage, it will proc Uxia aligned damage, and it will have her wear black while sporting short hair. While 2 of these effects don't matter too much, one still does, so let's move on to her elemental skill. The initial cast of her elemental skill allows FURINA to deal damage scaling off of her HP in an area. Then, as stated before, her elemental skill has 2 different effects depending on which stance she's in. Her Numa aligned stance summons an ally that heals the active character once every 2 seconds, which is rather simple. Her Uxia stance does a lot more though, as it summons 3 different pets, an octopus, a crab, and a seahorse. These pets will attack nearby enemies, and they each have their own AI that aggroes to specific targets. They also seem to have relatively normal ICD except for the octopus. Their ICD is also not shared between pets and is instead independent. Each pet also has its own attack damage, attack rate, attack area of effect, and they all drain all party members' HP by a certain percent. The seahorse will deal little damage, be single target focused, it will attack about once per 1.5 seconds, it will apply Hydra once every 2 hits, and it will drain HP by only 1% of all allies' max health. The octopus will deal average damage, it will have a small AoE, it will attack about once per 4 seconds, it will apply Hydra once every 2 hits, and it will drain HP by 2% of allies' max health. And finally, the crab will have a relatively good AoE and damage output, it will attack about once per 5 seconds, it will apply Hydra once per hit, and it will drain HP by 3% of all allies' max health. Each hit from these pets in the Uxia stance also generates 1 particle with a 2.5 second cooldown between generations. This means that while these guys are active, she will generate either 7 or 8 particles over the course of a team rotation. The amount of stuff that her Uxia stance's pets offer is kind of insane. It's so much that there seems to be little reason to use the healing stance. In the healing stance, not only are you losing out on the damage, but you're also losing out on the HP reduction, which is important, but we'll get to that in just a bit, the Hydra application, and the energy generation she offers. I don't know if this was an oversight or something, but it is quite baffling that they made one of her 2 stances significantly better than the other, though I guess that didn't stop them with Nilo and Tartaglia. Also note that while her skill is active, she can walk on water, and when changing stances, the active pets will be removed, and the new ones will spawn with their max duration. Next up is her burst, which is where the health reduction from her skill really comes into play. First off, it deals damage based on her HP. Then it will apply the universal revelry state to all nearby allies, which converts each percent HP change into a fanfare stack for FURINA. Each fanfare stack will then be converted into a percent damage bonus and incoming healing bonus to all allies. The exact conversion percentage is based on her burst talent level, but now you can see why having her health reduction active is much more important than her healing. Since this does not count for overhealing, the health reduction becomes even more important since every percent of health lost allows for healing to impact the buff that much more. But now let's move on to her passives. Her first allows FURINA to heal a random ally for 4% of their max health over the course of 4 seconds. However, this passive can only be activated when the active character is overhealed by someone other than FURINA. This is actually very good since healers usually cannot heal the entire team consistently. So while the healer is making sure your on-field character is right as rain, FURINA will help out the rest of the team to consistently convert health into damage bonus. Her Stitch of 4 passive buffs her elemental skill based on how much HP she has. Her skill's damage will be increased by 0.7% up to 28%, and the healing interval of her other skill will be increased by 0.4% up to 16%. This passive gives her a hard HP scaling cap of about 40,000 HP, as afterwards, you don't get as much from building into it. However, it is still very valuable and ends up making HP one of her most sought after stats. But that's it for the overview. Let's move on to FURINA's combos, which are incredibly simple. Since her skill has a 30-second duration and since her burst has an 18-second duration, she should always be used as the first character in the rotation. This will always be the case unless there is a character on the team with skill or burst duration that's longer than 18 seconds, like her fellow Archons, the Raiden Shogun, Nahida, or Zhongli. When she is on field, all you need to do is use her Dark Uxia Stance's elemental skill and then elemental burst. That's it. Like I said, rather simple. FURINA's talent priority is also quite simple. Since her skill is most of her damage output, you do want to make leveling it a priority. However, since her damage percent buff scales directly with her burst, maxing this first will be best. So I would recommend leveling these two together, prioritizing her skill first. But once at talent level 8, I would say that her burst should take priority until it's crowned. Her normal attacks you can ignore, as leveling them contributes very little to her damage output. Even at C2, when using these attacks is actually a viable option. Speaking of constellations, let's move on to talking about FURINA's. FURINA's first constellation grants herself 150 points of fanfare upon burst cast, and also increases the max fanfare amount by 150. This means that FURINA will now start with a 33% damage bonus for the team instead of 0, and the buff will now scale up to 132% damage bonus instead of 99%. This is, in simple terms, extremely freaking broken, as it ends up increasing your entire team's damage output by about 13%. This is almost on par with Nahida's C2, which is notorious for being one of the best constellations in the game, and this is only FURINA's first. However, this damage increase can vary from character to character, since it proves to be less effective on those characters that have a lot of percent damage bonuses, but that's really its only downside. Otherwise, this constellation is incredibly strong. Her second constellation is freaking stupid. It doubles the amount of fanfare she gains from all sources other than her first constellation, which allows her to reach max stacks of her buff incredibly quickly. Additionally, after she reaches max stacks of her fanfare, every additional fanfare point will increase her HP by 0.4% up to a max of 140%, or an extra 350 fanfare. This is insane, as it allows FURINA to reach max stacks of her fanfare insanely easily. Additionally, it will increase her own HP by an insane amount, which allows her to reach her HP cap while relying only on this constellation and HP substats. This constellation may be simple, but it's also insanely powerful, proves to be her best. FURINA's third constellation increases the level of her burst by 3. This does not matter much to her own damage output, but it does increase the amount that her fanfare stacks buff the team by. This leads to about a 3% damage increase, give or take 1%, for the entire team, which is still pretty fantastic. FURINA's C4 is much better though, since it will restore to her 4 energy 4 times over the course of a normal rotation. This allows her to swap out that energy recharge sands or a weapon for an HP sands or damage focused weapon, leading to much more damage. It's so much so that it ends up increasing her damage output by quite a significant portion, averaging somewhere around 25%. This innate energy generation also means that she does not need a battery to be used with her, which is incredibly good as it opens up her team versatility, even though just a little bit. FURINA's fifth constellation might be her worst constellation, but it is still pretty good. It increases the talent level of her skill, which is her main damage source. This leads to quite the solid damage increase of about 13%, which isn't much compared to her earlier ones, but it's still an honest increase. Finally, we have the Hydro Archon's C6. It grants her the center of attention state for 10 seconds after casting her elemental skill, which offers her a Hydro infusion on her normal charged and plunging attacks, and grants her 15% HP scaling on these attacks. Additionally, FURINA will gain a buff based on which arc alignment stance she's in that can only proc once per 0.1 seconds, which will be once per attack and can only proc 7 times. In her Dark Uxia stance, which is the one where her skill deals damage, she will heal the party based on 3% of her max health every 1 second for 2.5 seconds. If she is in her Light Pneuma stance, which is when her skill heals, her infusion will deal 30% of her max health instead of 15, and when she hits an enemy with this buff, all party members will lose 1% of their max health. Each of these effects can only be triggered 7 times while the center of attention state is active, after the 10 seconds duration is up, or after using the 7 trigger instances of the alignment specific effect, the center of attention state will end. This constellation has a lot going on, but it becomes a lot simpler when you realize that her Dark Uxia stance is much better, since her skill is a violent majority of her damage output, and since it also drains a significant portion of her team's HP for her damage buff, using her damage skill will be the superior option. On top of this, she will also be healing her team a bit, which is very good. Using her Uxia stance will increase her damage by up to 20%. However, if you use her Pneuma stance, then you're losing a significant portion of her damage output from her skill, and she will lose a significant amount of health degeneration. This would mean that she will be dealing less damage when compared to using her Usia stance. Using her Numa normal attacks will normally allow her to deal similar damage to a C5 FURINA, which is pretty bad. However, with this constellation, she can act as a pseudo DPS, and as such, her best in slot artifact set will become the Marie Hunter set. On top of that, this constellation will also allow her to act as a pseudo healer for her team, allowing her to function in even more team comps, which is very good. FURINA's constellations are absolutely bonkers. All of them have a decent impact for the team at a minimum, or they're breaking my scale to measure how good constellations are at a maximum. I don't think there's a single constellation here that can even be considered bad or mediocre, as even her worst, that being her C5, still increases her entire team's damage by a decent amount that doesn't fluctuate like some of her others can. In my opinion, FURINA has the best constellation spread in the game so far. If I were to recommend any character to wail out on, this would be it. She's that nutty. But now let's move away from her constellations and move on to her artifact options. In terms of artifact choices, she has two, both of which I mentioned when talking about FURINA's second constellation. By default, her best in most situations is going to be the Golden Troop, as it increases her main damage source by a massive amount. However, she does also have the Marie Hunter set, which is about 10% better for her if using her normal attacks with her C2. However, without this constellation, or if you end up not using her C2's light Numa arc alignment stances on field effect, the Golden Troop will be better or just slightly behind Marie Hunter to the point where it's not worth swapping over. Main stats are kind of difficult, as it all depends. In a lot of situations, stacking a crap ton of HP until she reaches her 40,000 HP cap is the best option when it comes to her personal damage. What makes this more complicated is the fact that healing is not percent health based, while the scaling of FURINA's buff is. This means that the lower her and the rest of her team's health is, the more fanfare points FURINA will gain. However, since she has a massive amount of HP scaling, building directly into HP is incredibly impactful toward her personal damage output. So the question becomes, is building into her personal damage output or her team's damage output more impactful toward the team's total damage output? And the answer is yes. No, seriously, this doesn't matter too much. Instead, what is most important is having enough energy recharge for FURINA to use her burst every rotation, since it's such a vital part of her kit. Though building HP on the flower, attack on the feather, and energy recharge on the sands is normally best unless you have an amazing energy generating weapon like the Favonia's sword or the Festering Desire, or if you have her fourth constellation. For the others, that's basically up to you. HP and crit, Hydro and crit, HP and HP, this doesn't matter that much, as the damage differences between these options is only a few percent. There are times where there can be a much larger difference in damage, but that's normally with obvious stuff like don't build more HP on Key of Kajnasut when she has a harsh HP scaling cap, don't build more crit on Light of Foliar Incision when it has so much already, and don't build more percent damage bonus on Wolf Fang when it offers almost as much as a Goblet. If we don't take these three into consideration, the average damage becomes less than 2%. So if you use your Wrinkly Thinker even just a little bit, you'll be fine. But if you do want to keep it simple and know her best all-around option, use HP on the Goblet and crit on the Circlet. This will average to be her highest damage possible in most situations, and it will be her best pickup when her fanfare is maxed out. For substats, you're mostly looking for energy recharge at about 170% up to 180% if you want to play it a bit safer. Since most of her particle generation is while she's off-field, she either needs a high energy recharge stat, an energy generating weapon, or a battery unit. In these cases, it can drop more toward 150% at max, which will help a lot. After that, HP is incredibly important for her personal damage output until she hits her 40,000 HP cap. However, there are times where you might want to use her in a double Hydro composition, in which case it's best to put her at about 37,000 HP. After that, focus on getting her crit ratio to be the normal 1 to 2. As you go up in constellations, these rules will stay the same, but you will notice that you will wind up running her with HP, Hydro damage, and crit starting at C4 because this constellation helps so much with her energy recharge issue. In terms of weapon options, FURINA has a good assortment. However, there's not much here that's free-to-play friendly. Her best is her signature weapon, the Splendor of Still Waters, due to the massive crit damage stat, the HP percent stat, and the elemental skill damage it offers. Second off, we have the Primordial Jade Cutter, which offers a significant crit rate increase and some HP for FURINA to scale with. Then, oddly enough, we have the Festering Desire, which was the first event weapon offered in Genshin Impact. This means that not a lot of people have it and can never get it, which sucks, especially since it is a free-to-play option. It's so powerful due to the energy recharge, elemental skill damage bonus, and its elemental skill crit rate bonus. These are all stats that FURINA wants, which is why it's up so high. Then there's the Key of Kajnasut, which offers mostly HP, but will also offer her entire team a solid 74 elemental mastery bonus. This is just another solid buff for the entire team, which means that this weapon can lead to just slightly less team damage output compared to her signature if the buff is only being used by one teammate. If two make use of it, then it is her best in slot option. I don't think that this goes to show that the key is the most broken weapon on her or anything. Instead, I see it more as her signature weapon kinda sucks at the current moment, since it doesn't help her major energy issue, so it will most likely get buffed soon. Up next is the Wolf Fang, which offers so much damage, skill and burst damage, and crit rate, it's definitely very good for her, but also definitely not worth the $50. For her best free-to-play weapon that's always obtainable, we have the Fluvsandra Ferryman, which is also on par with the Dockhand's Assistant in terms of damage output. However, one is a limited gacha 4-star weapon, one of the rarest kinds of weapons in the game, and the other you get by fishing, which gives Fluvsandra the edge in my book. However, the Dockhand can perform better in Elo teams, specifically when Furina's EM actually matters. Otherwise, this weapon's just not worth it. After this, we start to lean into the weapons that are way too costly for their worth. These are all decent options, but they output significantly less damage than the ones above, while being either just as costly or much more so. So I would not recommend these weapons. Instead, I would recommend using either Key of Kashnasut, the Fluvsandra Ferryman, or the Festering Desire, and not anything else on here, as these weapons will offer the best stats for FURINA and her team, while still being not as costly to achieve. However, if her signature weapon gets buffed in the future to actually be a decent weapon, I would also put that on the list. But with the weapons out of the way, let's talk about FURINA's synergies. FURINA's most notable synergy is with Baizhu, as she makes him a character worth pulling. This is specifically because he can heal the entire team to help FURINA build fanfare stacks, and he can keep the main DPS character easily topped off, so FURINA can heal the rest of the team. On top of this, they have insane synergy in Burgeon comps, as they can create a way to increase FURINA's fanfare stacks even further, while also allowing on-field characters to stack the Marie Hunter set incredibly quickly. While Yao Yao is another character that can contribute to Burgeons even better than he can, Baizhu's slow application is perfect here, as you don't want way too many Burgeons proccing when paired with Furina's massive HP drain. Yao Yao will also have the issue that she won't consistently overheal the team, and her heals will take away some of her Dendro application, which Baizhu can still provide while healing. This synergy is so strong that she enables Baizhu to stand as the best in slot defensive support in certain teams. Just like with Yelan, Jingshou will also pair insanely well with Furina. Jingshou offers knockback reduction, which is super important for any comp, but especially with healers due to their lack of knockback resistance. He will also grant her Hydra Resonance for more damage, will shred Hydra resistances for her, and will even help battery her. Additionally, he will grant damage reduction, so a good amount of damage that the team will receive will be from Furina's elemental burst. One of the larger issues with Furina is her inconsistent and odd application, which Jingshou helps with since he has the fastest off-field Hydra application in the game. These two are so good together that they can work incredibly well as a double Hydra core in most teams. In fact, in a good amount of cases, adding Baizhu to this duo can make an absurdly strong core for almost any main DPS out there. And finally, there is also Dea, technically speaking. However, in most cases, she will just act like a worse version of Jingshou. But Dea does end up benefiting from Furina insanely well, since Furina's Hydra application is fast enough for Dea to utilize and is automatic. Furina not only has a lot of good team options, but she also opens up some variations too. The greatest example of this is in vaporized team comps, as when paired with Baizhu and Jingshou, she can enable a new version and one of the strongest versions of vaporized teams. This composition not only allows these characters to run the new overpowered Marie Hunter set, but also allows for an additional damage source in the occasional Burgeon reaction. However, Furina can work well in normal vaporized teams too, just not with the shielder. This means that you'll have to pair your pyro character with Bennett and another defensive unit. This can be very hard to manage due to the health degeneration and no really fantastic defensive option. There's just no real good way to counteract her health degeneration at the moment. But don't worry, they'll sell us the solution eventually. This issue is also kind of present in freeze teams, as there's no insanely good healer. However, there is still Diona, Chi-Chi, and even the new Charlotte, who could definitely help a lot. However, this does mean you're losing out a lot on the damage that Shenhe offers. These teams would have so much damage percent that there would be a greater need for base stat increases, which these teams don't offer. This was already an issue with the massive base damage buffs that Shenhe and Kokomi could offer, but now the issue is much greater. So is this worth it over what's already around? It really just depends, but in a good amount of cases, it will be competitive. It could also work well with her fellow Fontaine member, Neuvillette, mainly due to his additional health reduction mechanic. This allows Neuvillette to be one of the only Hydra characters that Furina can actually pair well with, as most of the time she will be better off left alone. However, the additional health reduction will allow Furina to buff her team, including Neuvillette, even more. These two can also act as a decent core in a good amount of team comps, like Freeze, Vape, Hyperbloom, and every other comp that wants a crap ton of Hydro. Speaking of Hyperbloom though, while Furina may not apply enough Hydro to enable a crap ton of Hyperblooms, she does offer enough to be a very strong pick in Quick Bloom teams. Here she will act as a decent Hydro enabler that won't take away the Quicken Aura from the enemies. On top of this, her percent damage buff will pair insanely well with these teams, as it offers a masterful crap ton of damage for the entire team. She will even work well with an on-field Dendro unit like Alhaitham or Nahida, or even Baizhu for all the Dendro reactions they want to trigger. While she won't be the safest addition to the team, she will still prove to be an insanely valuable asset. Now, let's move on to the rating. In terms of damage output, Furina offers some of the best and most versatile off-field damage in the game. She could work well in AoE content, she could work well against one target, she's great against mobs, she's just fantastic all around. On average, she will deal similar damage to Yelan and to C6 Jingshou, but if enabled unable to reach max stacks, she will end up with comparable damage to that of some main DPS units. Her damage is grotesque, so I will give her 5 out of 5 here. In terms of application, she's just alright. In single target scenarios, she will be just behind the likes of Yolan, and in AoE, her application will be rather sporadic. However, it's still quite fast and can be the perfect amount depending on the situation, so I'll give her a pretty good 3.5 out of 5 for elemental application. For offense, she's ridiculous. On average, she offers a similar overall damage buff to Kazuha. While she may not offer the resistance shred that he does, FURINA has the potential to offer a better overall damage buff than he can. Her offensive utility is freaking phenomenal. This buff's only downside is that it requires a healer to be of any use. However, this buff will usually more than make up for that fact, earning FURINA a 5 out of 5 for offensive utility. Her battery potential is also rather fantastic, as she will generate almost double the amount of particles as any other character over a normal rotation. This is not the best in the game, but it's still rather fantastic, so I believe that a 4 out of 5 is very fitting here. In terms of defensive utility, FURINA kills her team. However, she can also heal her team pretty effectively when paired with a healer. Is this overcapping healing? Yes, but I see it being warranted given the fact that she, kills her team. It does also incentivize using healers with massive amounts of healing, which helps? I don't really know. This is a weird situation. 1.5, take it or leave it. In terms of flexibility and versatility, she can work insanely well in almost every team, and with almost every character. The only issue is that she requires a healer, but a lot of comps want a healer now, so this isn't that much of a detriment. There's also the fact that she enables healers to work in more spots than they could before, which is incredibly good. However, she still has her limits, like she can't be paired with Bennett, she can't be paired with most other Hydro characters, and she doesn't really work well with shielders, so I think she earns a 3 out of 5 here. In total, final rating turns out to be a 4 out of 5, which is insanely good. While this might not be a 5 out of 5, it's insanely hard to get a score like that, so most overpowered characters normally sit at the 4 and 4.5 rating because they do so much so insanely well. But now it's time for me to pass the conversation on to you. What do you all think of FURINA? Do you think I'm wrong in anything? Do you think she's better than I think? Then your thoughts in the comments down below. I will get out of your hair. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye!